In the recent debate between Alex O'Connor and Dinesh D'Souza, they mainly discussed the topic of whether or not the Bible was true or not, and they picked up into conversations and into topics like genocide and slavery in the Bible. So today I wanted to give an offer and to show people that there was a different way, another way to parse these types of views within the theistic perspective of the Bible. I feel Dinesh did not bring up some of these other points, so I would like to bring them up and see what other people think of them. I will be focusing on this video specifically on slavery because I've already addressed genocide objections from other atheists before in another video that I can link in the first section of my description below if anybody would like to see that. So let's just jump right into the slavery points. Alex challenges Dinesh towards the end of it to provide one verse that he could abolish slavery with, or to show to him that slavery was wrong. Alex gives Dinesh a hypothetical scenario for him to work around, and it goes, he put it into this idea, where he could travel back in time and offer the chattel slave owners a verse to get them to stop doing this horrific act, the chattel slavery. My first thoughts on this argument from Alex is that I find this as a very weak argument. To me, it sounds a lot like when the Muslims are denying that Jesus ever claimed to be God, and the Muslims will say, give me one verse where Jesus says he is God, right? And this puts the Christian in a pretty hard spot because Jesus never directly says the quote, I am God, worship me. And then the Muslim will conclude fallaciously that Jesus is not God. But you see, the point that I'm making here is that just because Jesus never said those words doesn't mean that he didn't teach this doctrine or imply it with the words that he did speak. Likewise with slavery, Alex is right that the Bible never specifically says, quote, end all slavery for good. But just because it doesn't say that doesn't mean that there isn't verses that imply the abolishment in a progressive setting. The Bible was a product of its day and made big moral improvements, but may not have done so on other issues like slavery, but it needed to continue to be discussed and eventually ended by evangelicals later on in history. So, as this through the part one of this idea, so we can move into the next section, that my first point is just to make is that just because it does not specifically say end slavery does not mean that the implication is not there. But to actually answer Alex, I would offer maybe a few verses to at least think about these types of ideas that Christians have always offered, and the ones that Christians offered all the way back into the days of trying to abolish slavery of that day, and even ones prior to that, whether it be Gregory of Nicaea or other people. Verses from Exodus concerning Israel coming out of slavery, and other big hitters like Genesis 1, verse 26, saying we are all image bearers of God, or think of Galatians 3:28, where Paul says that neither slave or free, we are all equal in Christ. In the letter to Philemon, where Paul asks his friend to treat the slave as he would treat himself or any other Christian brother at that point. These are implications on ending slavery. Like when Jesus said things like, for example, as I used in the example earlier in this video about, the Muslim example, Jesus said things like when he was asked about his identity, he would say things like, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Just because Jesus did not say specifically, I'm God, does not mean that he wasn't viewing himself as God in this specific passage, as we can pertain from like Daniel 13. And the point of my argument, this is an analogy that I'm using to get someone to see that just because it doesn't say it implicitly doesn't mean that it isn't implying it explicitly. Think of another verse. Let's say Jeremiah chapter 34. Verses 8 through 20, where God is chastising Israel for taking other Israelites back into slavery after letting them free. Obviously, this is not to Gentiles, but the implication is that slavery is not how to treat your brother. And as I would continue to argue that the Bible is a progressive setting, that it's happening organically. And what I mean by that is that the moral and ethical progress, God is working through individuals that were already evil and needed their worldviews challenged on these moral and ethical issues to begin with. So God slowly progressed them into these new moral concepts. So he starts with this, and then he can slowly bring about better goods after that. Now, Alex or any other atheist could respond to this by saying he has no issue with this, but um, he sees this as a new way of reinterpreting the Bible, and it is not how people of antiquity viewed the Bible. These specific Old Testament passages that I have quoted, and a couple of the New Testament passage. Some will even quote um, passages like Ephesians 6:5 to demonstrate this, where it talks about, slaves, obey your masters and stuff of this stature. So we have 2 points here. Are there passages that can show slavery is wrong, and did guys like Luther and people of his day read the Bible out of context in arguing against slavery and whatnot? So I would argue that Luther and others did read the Bible in its correct context. To go along with some of the other verses that I mentioned, another verse or so that could go in this would be 1 Timothy chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 21, showing that slavery is not a good thing according to Paul. Alex on this scenario would obviously quote, again like I said a minute ago, Ephesians 6:5, and others to say, well, he supported it here, right? And these objections are fine and are good objections and should be raised. But I would respond by saying, just because Paul gives outlines of how to deal with a fallen world does not mean that he approves of the actions in the fallen world. Obviously, slavery in this context. Moral and ethical systems need to be progressively trying to get better into these senses, and that's exactly what Christianity has done. It has led to so many of these other great moral prospects getting better and better over time. This is why the Bible, in context, is it condemns slavery from Genesis to Philemon to Paul's letters and to the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus, right? So that's the main thing here. To the second point, we have to remember that the abolition of slavery was a evangelical movement, and this is you can look at this all the way back from historian Tom Holland. But let me know what you guys think below, and like and subscribe for more content like this.